The pencil scratched across the paper in steady, measured strokes. Each equation flowed into the next with practiced precision, the kind that comes from years of calculating fuel loads, wind vectors, and descent rates under pressure. The community college classroom hummed with fluorescent lights and the occasional cough from younger students struggling through their remedial algebra midterm. Nobody paid attention to the woman in the back row, her weathered hands moving with mechanical certainty through problems that most would consider impossibly complex. Lieutenant Colonel Valentina Viper Reyes didn't look up when the door opened. She'd learned long ago that maintaining focus was everything. Whether threading an F-16 through a canyon at Mach 1.2 or solving for X in a room full of 19-year-olds who thought she was just another returning student trying to finish her degree. The silver streaks in her black hair caught the light as she bent over her paper, but the scars along her left jawline remained hidden in shadow. The footsteps were wrong, too synchronized, too purposeful. Valentina's hand stilled mid-equation, though she didn't lift her eyes. 23 years of combat aviation had taught her to read a room through sound alone. These weren't late students. These were operators moving in formation. "Ma'am." The voice carried the unmistakable cadence of special operations, controlled, respectful, urgent. She finally looked up. 6 Navy SEALs stood in full tactical gear, their weapons secured but present. The lead operator, a master chief with eyes that had seen too much, held her gaze with an expression she recognized from a dozen classified briefings. Something had gone catastrophically wrong somewhere in the world. The entire classroom had frozen. Students twisted in their seats, phones already rising to capture whatever was happening. Professor Martinez stood slack-jawed at the whiteboard, his marker still raised. "Colonel Reyes," the Master Chief continued, his voice cutting through the silence, "we need you to come with us immediately. National Command Authority has recalled you to active status." Valentina set down her pencil with deliberate calm. The equation remained unfinished, a quadratic formula suspended between problem and solution. She'd been retired for exactly 93 days. 93 days of trying to pretend that her reflexes weren't still sharp enough to detect the slightest engine vibration at 30,000 feet. 93 days of solving math problems instead of combat scenarios. "How bad?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be classified. "Bad enough that they sent us to find the only pilot who ever landed a burning Viper on a carrier deck with no hydraulics and half a wing." The Master Chief's jaw tightened. "Bad enough that the President asked for you by name." The classroom erupted in whispers and camera flashes. Valentina stood slowly, her joints protesting after 2 hours in the uncomfortable plastic chair. She gathered her things with the same methodical precision she'd once used for pre-flight checks. The unfinished test paper remained on the desk, her name written neatly at the top. Nobody in the United States military forgot what happened over the Taiwan Strait 5 years ago. The day a single F-16 pilot held off 17 enemy aircraft for 43 minutes until reinforcements arrived. The day Viper Reyes became a legend. But legends were supposed to fade into quiet retirements, teaching positions, or consulting gigs. They weren't supposed to be pulled out of community college math classes by Tier 1 operators who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Valentina nodded once to the SEALs, then turned to face her stunned professor. "Sir, I'll need to make up this exam." The Master Chief actually smiled, a tight, grim expression. "Ma'am, if we pull this off, I don't think anyone's going to care about your algebra grade." As she walked toward the door, flanked by the most elite warriors America produced, Valentina's mind had already shifted from mathematical equations to tactical calculations. The muscle memory was still there, encoded in every synapse. Altitude, airspeed, angle of attack, the holy trinity of fighter aviation. Her students would later describe how her entire bearing changed in those few seconds, how the middle-aged woman solving for X transformed into something else entirely. Something dangerous. The helicopter was already spinning up on the soccer field outside, its rotors beating the air with familiar violence. Valentina climbed aboard without hesitation, the seals forming a protective perimeter around her. As the aircraft lifted off, she caught a glimpse of students pressed against classroom windows, their phones still recording. "Mission brief," she asked over the rotor noise. The Master Chief handed her a tablet, its screen showing satellite imagery of a carrier strike group in the South China Sea. Red markers indicated enemy positions. Too many red markers. Carrier Air Wing 7 is combat ineffective. Lost half their birds in the first engagement. He had to shout over the noise. The enemy has some kind of new electronic warfare capability. Every pilot under 40 can't seem to adapt. The systems they've trained on their whole careers are useless. Valentina studied the tactical display, her mind already running through possibilities. Modern pilots relied too heavily on computer assistance, heads-up displays, and automated systems. But she'd learned to fly in an era when you still had to feel the aircraft, read the sky itself. "They need someone who can fly analog," she said. "They need Viper," the Master Chief corrected. "The woman who shot down 3 MiGs with a malfunctioning radar and a sticky trigger." The helicopter banked hard, heading toward the military airfield where a C-17 waited with engines running. Valentina closed her eyes, feeling the aircraft's movements, letting her body remember what it meant to be one with a machine. Somewhere in the South China Sea, American pilots were dying, young men and women who'd never learned to trust their instincts over their instruments. "How long until I'm in the air?" she asked. 6 hours to Kadena, another 2 to the carrier. They're preparing your bird now." Your bird, present tense, as if she'd never left, as if the universe had always known she'd be called back. The math test seemed like a lifetime ago already, though it had been only minutes. Valentina wondered if she'd ever finish that quadratic equation. Then she dismissed the thought. Some problems were meant to remain unsolved. Others demanded immediate attention. And right now, 2,200 miles away, the United States Navy was learning the difference. The transport helicopter descended toward the waiting C-17, its cargo bay open like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. Valentina felt no fear, only the cold certainty that had carried her through 5 combat deployments and countless missions that never made the official records. They called her Viper for a reason, not because she struck fast, but because she struck with precision when everyone least expected it. "Colonel," the Master Chief said as they prepared to transfer aircraft, "there's something else. The enemy pilots, they've been asking for you by name on the guard frequency. They know you're retired and they're taunting our crews about it." Valentina's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. The enemy had made a crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that Vipers were most dangerous when cornered, most lethal when provoked. "Then let's remind them why some pilots become legends," she said, stepping into the C-17's vast interior, "and why legends never really retire." The cargo ramp began to close, sealing her into the military machine that would carry her back to war. Outside, the community college grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Inside, Valentina Reyes was already becoming Viper again, piece by piece, memory by memory. The Pacific Ocean waited. The enemy waited. And somewhere between the California coast and the South China Sea, a mathematical proof was about to be written in contrails and fire. The equation was simple. One pilot, past her prime by conventional standards, against odds that had already broken younger, stronger aviators. But Valentina had learned long ago that aerial combat wasn't about youth or strength. It was about understanding the fundamental truth of flight, that every aircraft, no matter how advanced, was still just metal and fuel defying gravity through will and physics, and she'd spent a lifetime mastering both. The C-17 climbed into the afternoon sky, racing the sun toward tomorrow's war. Inside, surrounded by SEALs who'd seen hell and lived to tell about it, Valentina began her transformation. She pulled her hair back into the tight bun she'd worn for 2 decades of service. She accepted the flight suit they offered, feeling the familiar weight of the material against her skin. "Ma'am," one of the younger SEALs ventured, "is it true what they say about Taiwan?" Valentina looked at him, barely older than her own son would have been. "What do they say?" "That you flew your damaged bird directly at the enemy formation, made them think you were going kamikaze, then pulled up at the last second and took out 3 of them with your jet wash and debris." She almost smiled. "Son, the truth is rarely as interesting as the legend." But the Master Chief, who'd read the classified after-action report, knew better. The truth was more incredible than anything Hollywood could invent. Valentina Reyes had done exactly what the stories claimed, and more. She'd turned her crippled fighter into a weapon itself, using physics and psychology in equal measure. "Get some rest, Colonel," he advised. "You're going to need it." Valentina closed her eyes, but she wasn't sleeping. She was remembering. Every engagement, every evasion, every impossible moment when death had seemed certain, until she found that one perfect angle, that one perfect instant to strike. The younger pilots called it instinct. The engineers called it impossible. She called it mathematics, the brutal calculus of survival at 9GS. The C-17 continued its relentless push westward, carrying its precious cargo toward a conflict that would either end with American carriers burning in the Pacific, or with one middle-aged woman proving that technology could never fully replace the human spirit. The SEALs around her checked their equipment with practiced efficiency, preparing for their own missions. But they kept glancing at her, this small woman who seemed to radiate a quiet lethality that had nothing to do with muscles or weapons. They'd all heard the stories. The pilot who'd once nursed a wounded F-16 1,500 miles home on one engine in prayer. The woman who'd violated direct orders to provide close air support for a trapped Marine unit, saving 43 lives and earning both a court-martial and a Medal of Honor, though the court-martial was quietly dropped. The legend who'd taught an entire generation of fighter pilots that the most sophisticated sensor in any cockpit was still the human brain. "Colonel," the Master Chief said quietly, "there's one more thing. The Chinese pilot leading their formation, he claims to be the one who damaged your aircraft 5 years ago. He's been broadcasting that he's waiting to finish what he started." Valentina's eyes opened, and for the first time since leaving the classroom she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "His name is Zhang Wei," she said softly. "Call sign Dragon. Flies a J-20. Excellent pilot, probably their best. But he has a tell, he always rolls left before committing to an attack. Just a fraction of a second, but it's there." The SEALs exchanged glances. She'd memorized her opponent's habits from a single engagement 5 years ago, filed them away in case they ever met again. "You've been expecting this," the Master Chief said. "It wasn't a question." "I've been solving math problems," Valentina replied. "But every equation has been about energy management, angle of attack, and optimal merge geometry. My professor thought I was struggling with algebra. I was actually calculating how to fight the next war with the last war's equipment." The C-17 hit turbulence, bucking slightly. Valentina didn't even react, her body automatically adjusting to the aircraft's movement. Around her, the SEALs gripped their seats. She was already home, already part of the machine, already calculating angles and velocities. 4 hours to Kadena. Another 2 to the carrier. 6 hours to transform from a community college student back into the deadliest fighter pilot the Navy had ever produced. 6 hours to prepare for a confrontation that would determine whether American naval aviation lived or died in the digital age. The math was simple. The execution would be anything but. Outside the aircraft, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Valentina watched through a small window, reading the weather patterns, the wind shear, the atmospheric conditions that would affect flight operations. Every detail mattered. Every variable counted. In her mind, she was already in the cockpit, already feeling the stick in her hand, the throttle under her left palm. The enemy thought they were facing a retired pilot, rusty and past her prime. They were about to learn that some skills never fade, and some warriors never truly leave the battlefield. They just solve math problems until the world needs them again. The C-17 flew on, carrying Death dressed as a middle-aged woman toward a date with destiny. Behind them, at a community college in California, 23 students would soon upload their videos to social media, not yet understanding what they'd witnessed. Within hours, the world would know that Viper was back. But by then, it would already be too late for her enemies to prepare. Because Valentina Reyes had been preparing for 93 days, disguising combat mathematics as college algebra, waiting for the call she somehow knew would come. The call that would send her back to the only classroom that ever really mattered, the infinite blue arena where physics and pilot became one. The transport aircraft pierced the gathering darkness, racing toward tomorrow's dawn and yesterday's war, carrying a legend back to life. Time to solve a different kind of problem. The kind written in blood and contrails across an unforgiving sky. Kadena Air Base materialized from the pre-dawn darkness like a constellation of runway lights and alert fighters. The C-17 touched down with barely a whisper, its massive frame settling onto Japanese soil with practiced grace. Valentina was already standing before the aircraft stopped rolling, her internal clock perfectly synchronized with the mission timeline. 4 hours of flight had been enough to shed the civilian skin entirely. What stood in the cargo bay was pure warrior. "Your ride's waiting," the Master Chief said, gesturing to a helicopter already spinning up on the adjacent pad. "Straight to the Reagan. Captain wants you in the air within 30 minutes of landing." Valentina nodded, then paused at the cargo door. "Master Chief, those kids in my classroom, they're going to plaster this all over the internet." "Already happening, ma'am. Videos going viral as we speak. #Viper Returns is trending worldwide." "Good," she said, surprising him. "Let the enemy watch. Let them see me coming. Fear is half the battle and expectation is the other half. They'll be so focused on me, they won't see what's really happening." She didn't elaborate, just walked down the ramp into the humid Okinawa morning. The helicopter crew snapped to attention as she approached, their eyes reflecting the same mixture of awe and curiosity she'd seen in the SEALs. Word traveled fast in the military, and her reputation traveled faster. The flight to the carrier was smooth, the Pacific calm beneath them. Valentina used the time to review the tactical data on the tablet, absorbing every detail of the enemy's new capabilities. Electronic warfare suite that could blind modern targeting systems. Adaptive jamming that evolved faster than current countermeasures could adjust. It was impressive technology, the kind that made fifth-generation fighters into expensive paperweights. But they'd made one crucial error in their calculations. They'd assumed all pilots were created equal, that training and technology were interchangeable. They'd forgotten about the generation that had learned to fly by feeling, that could navigate by stars and dead reckoning, that could put rounds on target using nothing but Kentucky windage and experience. The USS Ronald Reagan appeared on the horizon, its deck already alive with activity. Valentina could see the telltale signs of combat operations, alert fighters on the catapults, rescue helicopters hovering nearby, the defensive screen of destroyers arranged in perfect formation. But there was something else too, something wrong. The normal rhythm was off. She could see it in the way the deck crew moved, the hesitation in their choreographed dance. They were afraid. The helicopter settled onto the deck with a slight jar, and Valentina was out before the rotors stopped spinning. Captain Morrison was waiting, his face drawn with exhaustion and something else, relief, maybe, or desperate hope. "Colonel Reyes," he said, saluting sharply, "thank God you're here." She returned the salute, then looked past him to the ready room visible through the tower windows. Young faces stared back, pilots who'd lost faith in their aircraft and, worse, in themselves. "Show me my bird," she said. Morrison led her to the hangar deck, where a sight both familiar and foreign waited. An F-16 Viper, but not just any Viper. They'd pulled it from the boneyard, one of the last Block 30s still configured for pure analog backup systems. No fly-by-wire dependency, no computer-assisted stability, just steel cables and hydraulic pressure between pilot and control surfaces. "She's old," Morrison said apologetically, "but she's the only thing we've got that their jamming can't completely compromise." Valentina ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rivets and patches from decades of service. The aircraft had history written in its metal skin, scorch marks from close calls, repair welds from battle damage, the subtle asymmetry that came from being rebuilt multiple times. "She's perfect," Valentina said. "What's her story?" Serial number 820999. Saw action in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Her last pilot called her Phoenix because she kept coming back from missions that should have killed her. "Phoenix," Valentina repeated, then shook her head. "No, she needs a new name for a new war." She looked at the tail number again, 999. Nines, 3 nines, she's nines now. A crew chief approached, a woman barely into her 20s with grease-stained hands and worried eyes. "Ma'am, we've done what we can, but she's temperamental. The engine runs hot, the stick pulls left above Mach 0.9, and the radar is basically decorative at this point." "Good," Valentina said, surprising everyone. "Perfect machines make lazy pilots. What about weapons?" 4 Sidewinders, 2 AMRAAMs, and the gun. 520 rounds of 20mm. That's all we could scrounge. Valentina did the math instantly. 6 missiles against an enemy that had already proven capable of defeating or deflecting most guided weapons. 520 rounds meant about 6 seconds of sustained fire. It would have to be enough. "I need to talk to the pilots," she said. Morrison hesitated. "Colonel, morale is." "I know exactly what morale is, Captain. That's why I need to talk to them." The ready room fell silent when she entered. 22 faces turned toward her, most barely older than the students she'd left behind in California. But these weren't students anymore. These were combat veterans who'd been handed their first real defeat and didn't know how to process it. "I know you," she said to the room. "Not individually, but I know you. You're the Xbox generation. You grew up with perfect graphics and infinite lives. You trained on simulators so realistic you could feel the rain on the canopy. You fly aircraft that cost more than small countries' GDP, with sensors that can track a golf ball from 50 miles away." Some of them shifted uncomfortably. One pilot, barely old enough to shave, looked like he might speak but thought better of it. "And now all that's gone," Valentina continued. "The enemy took away your toys and you don't know how to fight without them. Good." That got their attention. Combat isn't about technology. It never was. It's about who wants it more. It's about who's willing to get closer, turn harder, push further. The enemy thinks they've won because they've blinded your sensors, but they've actually given us an advantage. "What advantage?" a pilot asked, Coulson Razor according to his patch. "They've made the fight personal again. No more hiding behind technology. No more letting computers do the thinking. It's going to be knife fight range, visual targeting, pure stick and rudder. The kind of flying your instructors told you would never happen again." She walked to the window overlooking the flight deck, where 9 sat waiting. "They're jamming our electronics, but they can't jam physics. They can't jam training. They can't jam the human eye connected to a human brain connected to human hands. And they sure as hell can't jam rage." "You're going up in that?" another pilot asked, pointing at the ancient F-16. "I'm going up in that," she confirmed. "And I'm going to show them why the United States Navy has owned these skis for 80 years. Not because we have the best technology, but because we have the best pilots. Pilots who can adapt, overcome, and excel even when everything goes wrong. She turned back to face them, and something in her expression made them all sit straighter. Watch my 6-minute engagement. Learn from it. Then get back in your birds and remember what it means to be naval aviators. Because after I'm done reminding the enemy why they used to fear us, you're going to help me finish this. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Razor Chin spoke up. All due respect, ma'am, but our F-35s are sitting ducks out there. The jamming is. Lieutenant Commander, the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk with no instruments at all. Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic with a compass and a prayer. Your aircraft still flies, doesn't it? The stick still moves the control surfaces. The throttle still controls the engine. Yes, ma'am, but... No buts. You've been trained to trust your instruments. Now I'm telling you to trust your instincts. The enemy is jamming electromagnetic signals, not your brain. Use your eyes. Use parallax to judge distance. Feel the aircraft's energy state through your body. Fly like your great-grandfathers did over MiG Alley in Vietnam. She looked at each of them in turn, memorizing faces that might not survive the next 24 hours. I'm launching in 20 minutes. When I come back, we're going to have a different conversation. One about how we're going to take this fight to them with whatever we have left. Understood? Yes, ma'am, they chorused, and for the first time there was energy in it. Valentina left them to digest her words and headed for the flight equipment room. The gear waiting for her was older, pulled from storage, smelling of mothballs and history. She suited up with practiced efficiency, each piece of equipment awakening muscle memory. G-suit, survival vest, helmet. The helmet was scratched and worn, with a piece of tape across the visor that read Viper in faded letters. Someone had found her old helmet, the one she'd worn over Taiwan. She peeled off the old tape and left the helmet bare. This wasn't about call signs or reputation anymore. This was about survival. On the flight deck, the sunrise painted everything gold and shadow. The deck crew worked around nines with newfound purpose, their movements sharp and professional. Word had spread. Viper was flying again in an aircraft older than some of the maintainers, against odds that had already claimed 12 American fighters. The crew chief helped her into the cockpit, the ancient ejection seat groaning slightly under her weight. Everything was analog, round dial instruments, manual switches, no multifunction displays. It was like stepping back in time, except the threats waiting beyond the horizon were thoroughly modern. Ma'am, the crew chief said, leaning in close. She pulls hard left in a dive. Watch your fuel. The gauge reads about 3% optimistic, and the radar warning receiver only picks up about half the threats. Noted, Valentina said, running through her pre-flight checks. Everything mechanical responded with satisfying clicks and whirs. No computers to boot up, no software to initialize. Just machine and human, the way it had been for the first 50 years of military aviation. The control surfaces moved under her command, the stick feeling heavy but responsive in her grip. The engine spooled up with a rattling roar that modern jets had engineered away. Nines was crude, loud, and absolutely perfect for what was coming. Viper Tower, the radio crackled. You're cleared for launch, Catapult 2. Tower Viper, actually scratch that call sign. This is Nines, rolling to Cat 2. The taxi to the catapult was smooth, the deck crew guiding her with the same precision they showed the fifth-generation fighters. But she could see it in their eyes. They were watching history. The last analog dogfight in an age of digital warfare. The catapult shuttle engaged with a solid thunk. Ahead, the Pacific stretched endlessly, its surface reflecting the morning sun like hammered gold. Somewhere out there, hidden in the electromagnetic fog of their jamming, the enemy waited. They expected to face demoralized American pilots in compromised aircraft. They were about to meet something else entirely. Nines, you're hooked up, on your signal. Valentina took a deep breath, feeling the aircraft trembling with barely contained energy around her. She thought of her students back in California, probably watching the news by now. She thought of the young pilots in the ready room, desperately needing someone to show them the way. She thought of Zhang Wei, the enemy ace who'd been taunting their forces, waiting for his rematch. Then she stopped thinking and simply became. She snapped a salute to the catapult officer who returned it crisply. The launch sequence began, pressure building behind the aircraft like a coiled spring. In modern jets, computers manage the launch, optimizing thrust and angle. In Nines, it was all on her. The catapult fired. 0 to 150 knots in 2 seconds. The acceleration crushed her into the seat, but her hands were already moving, adjusting stick and throttle as Nines leaped from the deck. The old F-16 climbed eagerly, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Nines airborne, she radioed, then switched to the tactical frequency. Immediately, her headset filled with static, the enemy's jamming already reaching out to embrace her. But underneath it, she could hear something else. Guard frequency, the emergency channel that couldn't be fully suppressed. American pilot, a accented voice said in clear English. This is Colonel Zhang Wei. I have been waiting for you, Viper. Come, let us finish our dance. Valentina smiled grimly, pushing Nines into a climbing turn toward the rising sun. The enemy had just revealed their position by transmitting. Amateur move, letting ego override tactics. But then, Zhang had always been proud. It was his weakness 5 years ago, and it would be his downfall today. Zhang, she transmitted back. I'm not Viper anymore. I'm just an old woman who was trying to finish her math degree. You should have left me alone. Brave words. Your young pilots said similar things before I sent them swimming. The admission that American pilots had survived their shootdowns was useful intelligence, but Valentina filed it away. Right now, she had bigger problems. Her radar was showing nothing but snow, the jamming turning her primary sensor into expensive static. But her eyes worked fine, and at 20,000 feet, she could see for miles. There, 7 contrails, high and to the northwest. The enemy formation, confident in their electronic superiority, not even trying to hide their position. They expected her to fumble blind while they picked her off with long-range missiles. Valentina pushed Nines's nose down, trading altitude for speed. The old F-16 accelerated smoothly, passing through Mach 0.9, where the stick started pulling left as advertised. She compensated automatically, feeling the aircraft's quirks and working with them rather than against them. Where are you, old woman? Zhang taunted. My sensors show nothing. Have you run away already? She didn't respond. Let him talk. Every transmission helped her triangulate his position. The contrails were splitting now, 4 continuing straight while 3 curved toward her last known position. Zhang would be leading the intercept group, ego demanding he claim the kill personally. At 10,000 feet, Valentina leveled off and reduced thrust, letting Nines coast while she studied the sky. The enemy fighters were modern J-20s, stealthy and sophisticated. But stealth worked both ways. To remain invisible, they had to limit their own emissions. And at certain angles, even stealth aircraft reflected sunlight. There, a glint, barely visible, 15 degrees off her nose and high. Zhang had made another mistake, climbing into the sun's path. The same glory that painted the Pacific gold was betraying his position every few seconds. Valentina armed her sidewinders, the old heat-seekers growling as they searched for targets. They couldn't lock through the jamming, but she didn't need them to. Not yet. She pushed the throttle forward, Nines responding instantly. The distance closed rapidly, 40 miles, 30, 20. At 15 miles, she could see them clearly, 3 J-20s in perfect formation, their pilots probably staring at screens that showed empty sky. At 10 miles, Zhang must have spotted her visually because the formation suddenly broke, scattering like startled birds. But it was too late. Valentina had already computed the geometry, the angles, the energy states of all 4 aircraft. She pulled nines into a barrel roll, deliberately showing her belly to the enemy, inviting them to attack. It was an insane move, presenting the largest possible target. But it was also unexpected, and in aerial combat, the unexpected was often the difference between victory and death. Zhang took the bait, rolling inverted to bring his nose to bear. His wingmen followed, committing to the engagement. They still had every advantage: better aircraft, better missiles, 3-to-1 odds. But Valentina had something they didn't. She had nines, an aircraft too primitive for their jamming to fully affect. And she had 23 years of experience that no amount of technology could replicate. The merge happened at a combined closure rate of 1,200 knots. In the ready room, they called it the death dot, the point where all advantages except pilot skill ceased to matter. Valentina rolled nines hard right, pulling 9GS as she sliced between Zhang and his wingman. The old F-16 groaned but held together, its analog controls responding instantly to her demands. Zhang tried to follow, but his fly-by-wire system, confused by partial jamming, introduced a half-second delay. In aerial combat, half a second was an eternity. Valentina reversed her turn, the famous Viper double, and suddenly she was behind Zhang's wingman. The Sidewinder growled louder, sensing the heat from the J-20's engines. At this range, jamming was irrelevant. Valentina squeezed the trigger and the missile leaped from its rail, tracking true. The enemy pilot, realizing the danger too late, dumped flares and broke hard left. The missile ignored the flares, too close, too fast, too committed. It struck the J-20's left engine, the explosion spectacular in the morning light. The enemy fighter, mortally wounded but still flyable, dove for the deck trailing smoke and flame. "First blood," Valentina muttered, already rolling to avoid Zhang's predictable reversal. The colonel's J-20 passed so close she could see his helmet turning to track her. For an instant, their eyes met through their respective canopies, the old wolf and the young lion, teacher and student, legend and aspirant. Then the moment passed, and they were trying to kill each other again. The second wingman had problems. His aircraft, optimized for beyond visual range combat, was sluggish in the turning fight. Modern pilots trained for missile exchanges at 40 miles, not knife fights at 400 yards. Valentina exploited this mercilessly, forcing him to waste energy trying to maintain position while she danced nines through maneuvers that would have been suicidal in a computer-controlled aircraft. Zhang was the real threat. He'd learned from their last encounter and his aircraft was a generation ahead of hers. But he was also angry now, his wingman down, his perfect ambush ruined. Anger made pilots stupid, and Zhang was no exception. He tried to bracket her between himself and his remaining wingman, a classic pincer movement. But Valentina had been flying combat missions when Zhang was still in primary school. She recognized the setup and countered by going vertical, trading airspeed for altitude in a move older than jets themselves. Nines climbed straight up, its engine screaming in protest. At the apex, airspeed bleeding toward zero, Valentina kicked the rudder hard left. The old F-16 pivoted on its tail, a perfect hammerhead turn that pointed her nose straight down at Zhang's wingman. The Chinese pilot, fixated on where she had been, never saw her coming from directly above. Valentina fired her gun, walking the rounds from his tail to his cockpit. 20mm shells shredded the J-20's spine, and the aircraft came apart in a shower of composite material and burning fuel. 2 down, 490 rounds remaining. Zhang screamed something in Mandarin over the radio, his composure finally cracking. He pulled his J-20 into a climb, trying to match her altitude. But Valentina was already rolling inverted, pulling through a split test that brought her down on his 6 o'clock. This was it, the position every fighter pilot dreamed of and dreaded. She was in the kill zone, Zhang unable to shake her despite his aircraft's superior thrust and agility. But her fuel was running low, and those 4 other J-20s would be joining the fight soon. Time to end this. Zhang deployed everything: flares, chaff, electronic countermeasures that would have blinded a modern fighter. But Nines didn't care about electronics. Valentina flew by instinct, keeping her Pipper on his exhaust ports, waiting for the perfect moment. He rolled left. There it was, the tell she'd remembered from 5 years ago, just a fraction of a second warning before he committed to his escape maneuver. Valentina fired her second Sidewinder, but not at where Zhang was.